Hello and welcome to Ink and Inspiration, the interview series produced by Write and Vibe Publishing. In this series, we dive deep into the world of writing and all the incredible individuals who support it. From authors to publishers, indie bookstores to agents, conference organizers, and more. We speak with the people who make up the vibrant writing community ecosystem. Whether you're an aspiring author or a seasoned professional, this series is for you. This is your host, Cori. It's time to get lit. For joining us for another episode of Ink and Inspiration, where we chat to everybody who's anybody who's writing, publishing, working, doing all those things. Today, I am talking with Nicole Miller. Now, Nicole is a lovely woman from Cleveland, and I have known her for I don't know, just a couple years, not too long, but we have so much in common and we just kind of click. She is the founder of ND Miller Publishing. She is a four-time self-published author and novelist who's been blogging since 2012. She loves crafting stories that intertwine Black culture and faith. She produces edifying works that impact her community and transform hearts. And in her spare time, she loves shopping, spending time with her friends, and anything 90s R&B with a good glass of red wine. I feel that. So welcome, Nicole. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Cori.
Yeah, so how have you been today? Things going good? Got any writing projects going on?
Yeah, so I'm finalizing my second novel. It is now in the hands of my beta readers.
Mm,
Very exciting. On pins and needles to hear their responses. You've been
yeah,
there, so you know.
yes.
Yeah, a lot of my focus right now is marketing. So that's kind of what I was doing today.
Mhm, mhm. Now you do a lot of other stuff too. Like you don't just write, I see you do community events and I think you also told me you kind of work on content for companies. Is that true? I mean, like how do you do
So
that?
I'm a freelance journalist. So for the last year and a half, I've been covering stories of hope in the city. So
Mhm,
I am working on a couple of articles as we speak and have some upcoming meetings with some publications here in Cleveland. And I've really enjoyed it. I didn't do a degree in journalism. I actually had a degree and then dropped it for business. So
mhm.
in this season of my life, getting to kind of dive into the writing world as a journalist has been really fun on top of the creative writing.
Mm. You might be the first journalist that I know because I know people who have written maybe just a few articles for a paper or publication here and there, but I've never actually like been able to talk to a journalist. So your writing focuses on intertwining Black culture and faith. Do you also do this when you write for your journals, or your articles and things like that? Can you share like the inspiration behind that unique blend and its significance in your storytelling?
I will definitely say, with being a journalist, I am geared more towards stories that impact urban culture or are kind of a part of my areas of expertise in fashion or passion.
Mhm.
And fashion is one of those. But what I'll say is, I love stories that are about overcoming and triumph. And so,
Mhm.
whether that's journaling, journalism, blogging, creative storytelling, I will always infuse that messaging. And because
Mm.
I am faith based and, I do believe in God and am Christian, I would love to include that in any type of space that I get, whether it's blatant and direct or kind of subtle, you know.
Yeah.
I'll try to infuse my values. So even if it's not blatantly God, I'll still try to infuse uplifting stories of truth and
Mhm.
hope and love. So, interestingly enough, some of the stories that I've covered have dealt with entrepreneurship. I love
Mhm.
small businesses,
Mhm.
Black owned, female owned, especially. So, I want to uplift our community and let us know that there are people out here that
Mm.
are doing it, that are killing it.
Mhm.
So I try to do that. I also have stories about missing children. I have one that's kind of
Mhm.
in the mix of doing something like that because that is a heavy hitting topic in our community. So yeah, but with my creative writing, I've definitely infused faith because that's such a big part of who I am, as
Mm,
well as my culture. And there's been a lot of healing for me to tackle stories for the Black community when I did experience rejection and childhood bullying in my younger years. So
mm,
once I got experience with healing from my trauma in those areas, I was able to give back to my community and
mm,
uplift Black culture.
mm. You mentioned missing children in the community. I read a book, I want to say, I think it was this year or maybe last year, but it was called Monday's Not Coming. Have you read that?
It sounds so familiar, and I don't think I read it, but I feel like there could have been something made into TV or documentary.
Okay.
That's why.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar if it was actually made into like a movie or TV show yet, but it was a very impactful book on missing children. And basically, the premise is there's a young lady who has a friend. Her name is Monday, and they grow up together. They're best friends, and then the girl, the main character, would spend, and I may mess up a few details. It's been a while, but the main character, she spends like summers away from home, and then during that time she would write to her best friend Monday, and one day Monday's letters just stopped coming. And so she came back home and she's like, "Hey, what's going on with Monday? I haven't seen her." And Monday didn't live in the best neighborhood. And so, her mother didn't want her going over to, Monday's house to see, talk to her mother or her siblings or anything like that. But it was just a really good novel. And it has like a twist at the end, and it makes you, those twists, you kind of think, well, what did I just read? Did I read anything? Do I have to reread the book all over again to catch what I missed the first time? But it was a really good book. I do recommend it. But it's really good for when people do write the stories that are impactful and necessary to really just kind of bring to light things that are going on in our community that need to be worked on, that need to be worked through. So like in your quest to like produce like the edifying works and things like that, like what themes and messages do you aim to convey to impact your community and transform hearts? Like I know you kind of touched on that, but how do you make sure that you input those themes so that the community actually hears it and maybe makes a transformation in that process?
I think the theme that's in all of my writing is healing. So, my
Mhm.
very first book that I released in 2014 is nonfiction. It's called How to Overcome Heartbreak Recovering from Misguided Love. So,
Mm,
that book was actually inspired by my blog, and everyone around the world can relate to heartbreak. It doesn't matter
mhm,
what age, race, creed, you have experienced some form of heartbreak if you live long.
mhm,
And so I got such a response on my blog that I wrote the book. And I
mm.
think, well, I know because people have told me one of the things that's helped is my transparency. So
Yeah.
I'm very personable, raw, and authentic, and I get to do that in my blog and in my nonfiction. So with my fiction, I can create these characters that have wounds and trauma and abuse
Mhm,
and difficulty, and I can bring the reader on a journey to go through the healing process with them. And you're
mhm,
a writer, so oftentimes your protagonist has a want. They don't understand that the want is not the need, right? So you're
mhm.
dealing with the want initially, and then they're like, okay, but I really need this. And usually the need for my writing is healing. So
Okay.
I would definitely say healing, deliverance from difficult circumstances, restoration of relationships,
Mhm,
healing of relationships with parents, healing of relationships with other family members, of past experiences that you've had. And yeah, I think that that's pretty much what my messaging is across the board, no matter what you read. And what makes it work is the authenticity. And of course, I've
mm,
been through my own stuff. And so the positive thing about being a creative writer is that you get to release what you've gone through or what you've observed other people going through, and you can make it You can make it happen in your writing. You can change a few things, but because it's so real, I think that that's what brings transformation.
Mm, mm. Okay. So, you've been blogging since 2012, and blogging is fairly different than writing. You said you took your one blog, it was kind of shorter, and then you made it into a full novel. So, is there a lot of difficulty, or what are the differences that maybe you can tell the audience, like who are bloggers who are maybe wanting to transition or add in, the aspect of writing an entire novel? Can you talk about like how they differ, how they complement each other, and if you need to possibly have different approaches to both?
This is a very good question. And I have to laugh because I never saw myself as a novelist. So when I
Okay.
started writing blogs, it was really because I was bored at work. And I knew I was a good writer. And really, I was inspired by reading blogs because I love stories. And I forgot how much I love stories. And then I started reading blogs and then started my own. So it was more of a public diary, as they normally are. And it was just me sharing the things in my heart, usually dealing with my faith and different difficulties in my life. But when you're blogging, it's like you're probably writing 500 to 1,000 words. So
Mm,
you're sharing this synopsis, this preview of what's happening in now time. I can see how God dealt with me step by step in my writing career because my
mm.
very first book was 60 pages. It does
Oh,
not have
wow.
to be long,
Yeah.
right? But it was impactful and it was real. And I was able to take some of the things that I wrote about and put it in my book. But you do have to have a higher level of patience when you're writing any type of book, even if it's just 60 pages. It's not going to be 500 to 1,000 words. It's going to be 20 to 25,000, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Or
gonna take
even more. It might be like
right,
60,
right,
80,000.
right. You can start getting to the novel writing.
Yeah.
So with my first book, it was more patience. I'm not an outliner. I know they're usually outliners, fly by the seat of your pantsers. I'm a
Mhm,
pantser, but I did have an understanding of key points I wanted to hit, chapter
mm,
titles, those sorts of things, and how to tie it up, tie it all together. By the time I got into fiction writing, my first fiction book is a compilation of short stories. So, short stories is another form of writing where
mhm,
you probably have these bite sized, stories, but it's a little bit more advanced than a blog because you do go on a journey, more of a journey with your character and a climax, and you kind of end it, maybe not like
mhm.
it's kind of like on a cliffhanger, it can be, you don't have to
Yeah.
tie it much. But then I got into the full novel, and that was 60 to 80,000 words, as you say. So I built myself up. It wasn't like I just
Mm.
leaped into writing a novel.
Okay.
Yeah. So for me, it was, I had experiences writing for magazines, online literary journals. Like I was trying my hand being a guest blogger. Like
Yeah.
I was practicing my craft and developing my writing gift by the time I got to novel writing. And
Mhm,
so, what I will say with writing the novel, the patience is even more expanded because it took me 2 years. And
mm,
literally, I thought the first year I was done. And my editor was like, this is great, but these are the areas you need to work on. And I
mm,
literally spent a whole nother year editing. And that's when I
mm.
learned so much of writing is editing, right?
Yeah.
So what I'll say is you're definitely going to approach it differently because with the blog, you have a message you want to get to your reader in a shorter amount of time. By
Mhm,
the time you get to novel writing, you've expanded that. They're kind of living with you in this
mm.
experience with your characters, and it slowly unfolds, and you're taking your time. It's not as microwaved, it's more of like
Yeah.
slow steaming on the stove. So
Yeah.
there's an art for each type of writing style, whether it's blogging, being a journalist, writing short
Mhm,
stories, poetry, which I do as well. And then
mhm,
you get into creative writing as well as nonfiction. So an array of writing styles that you kind of channel your gift to
mm,
deliver the message in a different way depending on the style.
mm. So with blogging as well. So I read an article. Well, let me backtrack. Back in the day, probably around 2012, was when blogging really, I feel like it really took off. Like everybody was a blogger. Everybody wanted people to read, their blogs and things like that. And then it kind of fell off. And people found like, oh, I don't really like that. I'm going to do something else. Um, or people weren't getting the traffic, so they just kind of quit. But I saw an article recently and saying that blogging was making a comeback. Yeah, have you seen, I don't know if you track your stats or anything, but do you agree with blogging making a comeback? I mean, you've been in it. You're like, it's just something that you've been doing. So have you seen like a downturn and then an uptick again? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So it's very interesting because I didn't know blogging was like popping back then when I was doing it.
Okay.
I didn't even know. I was on a platform which you may be familiar with as WordPress. And so
Yeah.
the benefit with WordPress was that you had a blogging community, so your posts were automatically seen.
Mm,
So I had pretty good analytics for that reason because I'm in this hub, I'm on their platform, and these are bloggers and readers. Like they're gonna see your
mhm.
stuff, they're looking for you.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is when my mom transitioned in 2018 is when I stopped really blogging consistently. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I came back and got serious about my writing, I transitioned off of WordPress and went
Mm.
to my own website and started tracking my analytics directly with a third party email list.
Okay.
And now it's like, well, I've built my own community because I have my own audience. And so I'm no longer utilizing another platform. So now
Mhm.
I have my hub and I'm working on my branding, marketing, and promo to attract my readers and establish my audience and have ownership over my email list, which is a whole nother thing. Um,
Yeah.
I did hear about blogging falling off,
Mhm.
I honestly think it probably happened when I took a break from blogging. Like it probably
Okay.
happened around that time. And now that I'm back, I'm doing it different. So it still
Okay.
doesn't kind of affect me because now I'm about nurturing my own community.
Mhm. So, has your blogging writing changed over the years? Like, do you write about different topics nowadays than you did like in the beginning?
That's a great question. So what I'll say is when I got serious about my writing, which was 2022, I said, "Okay, Nicole, when do people read your blog? Look at your marketing
Mhm.
analytics. Oh, they read it at Monday morning at 7 a.m. Okay.
Mhm.
I need to stop writing willy-nilly whenever I feel like it. And I need to give these people a blog when they want it, which is Monday morning at 7 a.m.
Mhm.
So I started writing on Sundays, posting on Mondays. Now,
Mhm.
the topics, I still write generally what's going on with me, but now I'm aiming it more at the audience. Hey, I'm going through this. Are you? Can you relate
Mhm.
to this? So it's more about engagement to the audience as opposed to just expressing my feelings in the moment. So it is very
Yeah.
much more intentional as far as when
Yeah.
they see it and the information that they're receiving and if it's adding value to them.
Mm. Can you share a little bit about your writing routine or process? I mean, you said that you now write like Sunday mornings. So what does your writing process look like? And let's talk about your writing process for blogging and writing your novels.
Yes, so definitely blogging happens Sunday morning. I also create content surrounding the blog. And so I send out a weekly email to remind people to read the blog. And the weekly email also tells them to tune in to my Instagram live, where I'm basically
Mhm.
piggybacking off of the blog live. So now they have video content. And if they miss that, then that's on my YouTube channel. So that's a part of
Mhm.
my whole little ecosystem that I have going on.
Okay.
Writing the actual novel. So that varies because it is spirit led, it is intuitive. It is
Mhm.
like when I wrote When Love Wins and when I was like diligent about it, I was
Mhm.
waking up at 2 a.m. I
Oh
could
my
be writing.
goodness.
Yeah. So it was just creative hours is what I call
Yeah.
them. Now I'm blessed. I don't have children, family to be trying to, navigate their schedules.
Mhm.
But it was like, okay, if I'm up at 2 a.m., then I go to bed at 9, then I'm back up at 2 or 3, and then I'm
Mhm.
again. It could be like that. Or I
Yeah.
would be out with friends and I would only be out for a couple hours because I want to rush home and write.
Yeah.
Or especially with the first book, it was like my friends barely heard from me because I was in a writing season. So this time around with the novel, I was able to tell them like, "Hey, I'm in a writing season. This is what this means. Like I'm not as
Yeah.
available." So for me, I was able to churn out the second novel within 4 months. I was able to get
Nice.
the first draft, which I was like, okay, this is what it looks like when you know what you're doing. Like,
Yeah.
I think we were in the editing stage, but I got to it like so much faster than the first time.
Mm.
So I would say like when I'm in that season, it's just kind of like no holds bar. My face is to the ground. I'm gunning
Mhm.
for it. But when I'm out of that season, I'm more sensitive to rest. But then I'm also very focused on marketing, branding, and promo and doing networking.
Mhm.
And I also
Mhm.
write for other platforms and host events. So I still
Mhm.
stay busy.
Yeah. You mentioned at some point you were waking up at like 2 a.m. So a question that writers will sometimes ask or like, well, when do you write? And the answer is always like you said, yours is like spirit led. Mine is like, well, you have to write when your brain is creative and which, other things can put a damper on that. But I know like I'm not a morning person, right? So I can't wake up and write. I've tried it and I can push through if I know I really need to do something. But when you are writing out of your creative brain time frame, you'll end up putting mess on the pages and then which doubles your effort because then you have to go back and rewrite that mess that you put on that page. Do you find the same thing for you as well? Or do you see that sometimes when you're writing, if you've been writing for like an hour or longer, your brain kind of gets tired and you have to take a break?
This is the biggest thing for me, Corey. I
Uh,
take naps. Okay. And this
okay.
is something I've known about myself when I was in corporate.
Uh,
Like I would work a 9 to 5 and on my lunch break, I would eat really fast for 15 minutes and sleep for 45 and
what?
good to go. And all of my coworkers would be like, how are you not asleep? And what I learned, and I just wrote this in social media recently, is my
Uh-huh.
peak hours are like 7 to 12, and
Okay.
then 3 to 6. Okay, because
Okay.
I'm like I cannot. 12 to 3, I'm trying to take. My body is shutting down, and I'm
Yeah.
so frustrated with myself when I schedule meetings around that time. I'll be like, oh, why did I do this to myself? Like I know my body is like, girl, you need to be asleep right now. Like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm sensitive in that way, but
Uh-huh.
the thing that I've realized being creative is I may not be writing after 6, but I'm still creating. So I'm
Mhm.
making content and making all the stuff for social media and scheduling
Got
stuff. I'm
you.
still working. So there's different times of the day where my brain wants to do different things. So
Mhm.
first and foremost is administrative work. That's always priority. Meetings are always priority. That's a different type of energy that, I
Mhm.
have to relegate my day to or my month to, my schedule to. And then the creative part is, okay, am I going to write or am I going to put this flyer together or am I going to write a little social media thing? So
Mhm.
that's kind of like divvying it up and it's kind of feeling what I desire to do, what I have the energy for. There's just different
Mhm.
types of energy, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I agree totally with that. And that brings up another point for authors, especially self-published authors who maybe don't have like a personal assistant or something like that. Um,
What are
you,
those?
yeah, right. But you have to learn how to balance those things because you can just write a book and put it out there and really hope that people come and find it. But for majority of the authors, you have to do admin stuff. You have to do marketing. You have to do sales. Like authors are a small business all by themselves. You have to do shipping and packaging and all the things, like all the things. Do you have any tips for juggling that? Because listening to you, it seems and sounds like you do it very well.
Well, I appreciate the compliment as I know I'm in good company with that. But what I'll say is you have to have a system first and foremost. A woman I highly esteem I met with recently, and she's like, how are you doing it all? And this woman
Mm,
is doing the most. So I was like, how are you talking to me like this? But okay.
yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I have a system. This is my schedule, and I stick
Mhm,
to it. So I thrive off of routine. That's my personality. I'm a type A person. I do have a business background that helps immensely. There
mm,
are not too many artists and creatives that their brains are wired to do admin work as well as creative work, right? So you
mhm.
resonate with that. So I know
Yeah.
we're a rare breed.
Yeah.
And we're able to capitalize on that. But for the creatives who don't, do well with admin work, I do say outsource. Like,
Mm,
get you somebody off Fiverr that's cheap,
yeah.
and have them doing your admin stuff, or get a virtual admin or whatever. But definitely for me, it is I have a daily, weekly, and monthly calendar, and now I'm planning for
Mm,
quarterly stuff. And I
mm,
know God's training my brain to just think ahead. Even with the
mhm,
book launch for When Love Wins, I started planning that 9 months in advance. So
mm,
for me, it's planning. It's like looking ahead. This is what needs to happen. How am I going to stay visible? How am I going to push what I'm doing now and get people ready for what's coming? Right. I
mhm,
think every entrepreneur thinks that way. But yeah, I think having the system, and I'm gifted. I'm gifted to be an admin person, and my background's in bookkeeping too. So that helps me
mhm.
financially, and I reconcile my books at the first of the month.
Oh,
Um, Pay
wow.
out my personal bills, and I reconcile my business bookkeeping, and then I'm gearing up for taxes. I used to do taxes, now I just do them for my businesses. So I'm able to just keep that system, and it's worked for me.
Wow. You you are inspiring. I'm just like, "Wait,
Well,
what?"
this
Like,
is what I'll say. I am
"What?"
doing this full time. Most writers
Uh-huh.
are not full time writers. And
Mhm,
because I was already an entrepreneur. So I had a bookkeeping business, ABN bookkeeping. I had it for 4 years. I did taxes. I reconciled books for small businesses. But at the time, I opened up Indie Miller Publishing and started publishing books. And there was just this desire to be fully a creative. And I knew God was asking me to take it to the next level of faith,
mhm.
pull away from the bookkeeping. And I was like, okay, here we go, another level. Um,
Yeah.
but really focused on the creative part full time for the season. So that's the biggest thing. And not having the family and kids, because
Mhm.
that's a lot. And so what I
Yeah.
tell people who do have all that is 30 minutes a day. Like
Mhm.
write for 30 minutes a day, look and see what you have in a month. You can't do it all if you have all these other obligations. I just know for
Right.
me, I'm capitalizing on having the space and time to do it all.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Yeah, no, you are doing it, and I didn't know all that you were doing, so that's even, like, more, incredible. So as a four-time self-published author and novelist, what challenges have you faced in the self-publishing process, and how have those experiences shaped your approach to writing and publishing?
I was thinking about this question, and I think it's interesting because I honestly have had a very smooth process with
Okay.
publishing and with writing. And I know that's unique because I've talked to so many people who have been talking about, I want to write this book, and they've been saying it for 10 years and they've been
Mhm.
struggling to get there.
Yeah.
But thankfully I was able to navigate the publishing process smoothly. And I think that was because I was called to help other people publish it.
Mm.
They've had negative experiences, and I've come across other people who have had negative experiences. And now
Mhm.
I can say, well, let's help you have a positive experiences because I've had
Yeah.
it under my belt. Where challenges have arrived for me, I think,
Mhm.
is the gaining the visibility,
Mm.
partnering with other organizations that are not like minded, having to weed through and see who's really for you and who's not, going
Mhm.
to other people I esteemed as mentors for assistance and not getting it, or feeling like my work was being downed, and that's
Mm,
happened a few times. It's like, oh, I
mm.
thought you were okay. No, all right, so
Yeah.
that part has been like a learning process for me. But again, it is learning. So trying not to make those same decisions, learning how to
Mhm.
vet people, learning how to get like minded organizations and partnerships before I sign that contract.
Mm.
And working to get visibility. That is like the hardest thing in my journey. And it's the long game. I feel like
Mhm.
uh self-publishing and indie authorship is like baseball. It is like
Mhm.
slow and dry. I don't prefer to watch baseball. I like basketball, if I'm gonna watch anything. But it's like, okay, we still here, it's
Yeah.
19, we still here. So that's how it feels. I've been at it. It'll be 10 years next month since I published my
Nice.
first book. And again, I wasn't full time. So I
Mhm.
had a full time gig and I was doing it part time and I was hustling and I got tired. I was like, this is hard. After a few years, I was like, this is hard.
Yeah.
So getting back at it, getting serious, I've definitely seen ground taken and growth, but it's
Mhm.
taken years. So
Yeah, yeah. How do you I mean, you spoke kinda, like, about, like, negative experiences and positive experiences. Can you share, like, maybe do you have, like, a favorite positive interaction between, like, a reader or something that happened at an event or someone that contacted you and said, like, your story helped them and if you have like, one or two of your favorites, that's cool, but I'd love to hear some of those things.
yeah. So one that immediately comes to mind, and this is like amazing. So I had written How to Overcome Heartbreak and published it. And one of my blog followers, she actually was located in Cleveland, and I
Mm,
started following her back. And so I was at an event, I was selling books, and she pops up. And I realized it's her because I saw her picture on her blog. And she
mhm.
was like, I just read your book and it helped me so much. She was going through a breakup. So that blessed me. On top of that, we became friends. She ended up
Mm.
being my roommate. She moved
Ah,
in with me at the time. And now she's one of my closest friends.
oh,
So that was
wow.
such a divine experience. She actually was the connect for my first client for my other company, ABN Bookkeeping. But
Mm.
it was just like from one stage to the next, who knew that this reader would be a close friend? And now we're really
Yeah.
journeying together with waiting and dating and all that that entails. And have just really been close sisters, especially when my mom transitioned. She's just been
Mm,
something I've really leaned on. And it's like, all
mhm.
because you read my book. So it's been mutual.
Yeah, yeah,
But there's that happened a couple times. There were other people that became friends because they read my book and then we ended up in life together, like
yeah,
journey together. But yeah, I think for me, what still wows me is when people say, "Oh, I follow you," and I don't know them. And I'm like, "Okay."
yeah.
And they're like, "I'm a fan," like, or they requote things that I've said and post it and give me credit. And I'm like, "Really? This is
Nice.
vague, but okay."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you also mentioned your mom transitioning, and so sometimes people are able to see a distinct difference between their writing pre like tragedy and after tragedy. Do you feel like there is a difference between your writing before your mom transitioned and after?
That's a good question. I think the biggest difference is that I switched from nonfiction to fiction. So
Okay.
before my mom transitioned, she had read my first book and she's actually featured in my second book, How to Overcome
Okay.
Heartbreak, Recovering from Misguided Love. I
Hmm.
interviewed other men and women dealing with heartbreak. And the
Hmm.
beautiful thing is, I was able to share what she wrote at her service. So it was like I was able to capture her testimony in that book.
Hmm.
I remember her giving me permission, like, whatever you want to say, you could say it, as far as
Hmm.
my upbringing, which is great because now I'm working on a memoir and I'm like, okay, I'm glad she told me that. But the funny thing is, writing fiction, I was able to dive into fiction because when I was grieving, I couldn't read nonfiction. It was just
Mm,
too heavy, it was too direct, and
mm,
so I escaped into these worlds of fiction, not
mhm,
knowing that that was stirring up my own gift to write fiction and that I was called to
mhm,
be a creative fiction writer. So the biggest transition was that going from nonfiction to fiction and then writing a whole novel when I didn't even see myself as a fiction writer years prior.
yeah,
Definitely have elevated in my writing skills, taking
mhm,
writing workshops, practicing, even doing journalism, doing all these different types of writing have advanced me as a writer.
mm. So what's your favorite writing? Is it fiction, nonfiction, blogging, poetry, journalistic articles? Like, which is what's your favorite?
I say right now it is creative fiction.
Okay.
It really stretches me and it's really fun. You know,
Mhm.
finding these fun ways to explain things, looking up words because I'll be using the same words over and over like writers
Yeah.
do. Reading other great fiction and seeing how creative and colorful they can be with their language, reading Toni
Mhm.
Morrison and just being inspired, like, oh, one day.
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like writing When Love Wins is when I fell in love with writing. Writing
Mhm.
was never my first love. I always saw myself in music, so I incorporate a
Mm.
lot of music and fashion in my writing. So
Yeah,
it was like music was always my first love, and I never thought like anything other than that. So when I wrote When Love Wins, it was like, oh, I'm falling in love. I want to go home and be with my love. I want to be in this world. So
yeah.
yeah, I'm still kind of in that space.
Okay. Do you have a favorite genre that you read,
So
for fiction?
I really enjoyed Francine Rivers. She's a Christian fiction writer. She writes
Mhm.
like volumes. I don't know if you've ever read her writing, but she's kind of like historical Christian fiction. I feel like,
Okay.
yeah, Redeeming Love was like her major novel. It was like her first novel. They actually made a movie out of it a couple years
Mhm.
ago, and they nailed it,
Mm.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I love Black fiction, 90s Black fiction.
Yeah. So since you mentioned the 90s, how does the 90s, your shopping, your time with the friends and red wine, your personal interests, because how do they all affect or inspire your writing? I know a lot of times people I'm big on like experiences or moments, I'll say moments for sure. And so it was funny because I went to the Bahamas about a year, not in 2023 Christmas, but 2022 Christmas. And I came back, I'm like, can I put that in my writing? And if I do, can I write it off on my taxes, like the trip, right?
Yeah.
So,
See,
yeah,
now you thinking. Now you think.
yes, yes. And so I did ask my tax lady, and she said, like, in certain ways, you can write parts of the trip off, not the entire thing. But it's like as we experience things and moments, it's a joy to be able to incorporate that into our writing or have it inspire ours. So like how does that work for you?
And I think it kind of happened naturally. People were telling me that my writing gave them 90s vibes. I didn't even know that. I was like, oh. But what I will say is I'm such a product of my mother and grandmother.
Mm,
My grandmother loved reading 90s fiction, the Terry McMillans, the Sister
mhm,
Soldiers and all of that. And so that was such a beautiful time in my childhood, reading books that she read and sharing that love of passion.
mhm.
And the 90s was a Black renaissance. We had the
Yeah.
movies and the TV and the fashion and the music. And there's just nothing like that era now, and I've talked to
Yeah.
people, they feel the same way. They were like, "Yeah, y'all just had, like, all this creative space."
Mhm.
So, I think for me, because that time period in my life was so implemental to have it with my grandmother who was, like, my best friend for so long,
Mhm.
I aim to give that to this generation. I aim to give them that Black Renaissance experience. So,
Mm.
with When Love Wins, my main character, Ashley, she's a fashionista and she loves all things, fashion or whatever. And she's fun and she's popping and she's hitting all the spots and she's a good time. And then, I take you through the other side of things with Natalie, who's more sensitive and down to earth, but she's about social
Mhm.
justice and faith,
Yeah, yeah.
sound. And I could see both parts of myself in those characters. Um,
Mhm.
but even the whole world I'm creating called Devon's Cafe. So it's a Black owned cafe in New York and
Okay.
it pops up in a couple of the short stories in Urban Stories. It's in When Love Wins and it's in the novel I'm working on. Some of the characters in Devon's Cafe pop up in When Love Wins. And so there's a spinoff. But
Mm.
it's this world of the Black swag that I'm in anyway. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, this is my world. I want my people to see my world. So
yeah.
I think it just happens naturally because that's who I am. But one of my friends was like, "Girl, you give all the details with these outfits. Like my character be flying." So, and one of my other friends was like, "Everybody in here is attractive." Like, and that's
Yeah.
one of the things I love to do is to show an array of beauty in our culture.
Yes.
It doesn't matter skin tone or shape
Mhm.
or your, style. It's like we all fine and we all fine in these different ways.
That's right, that's right.
So my
So
goal is for those who read it to find them in the pages and
uh-huh.
those who aren't a part of the culture to learn. Like I want
Yeah.
them to be educated. And I've
Mhm.
heard that feedback from people who are not Black read my work and they seek it out because they want to be educated and they appreciate how I handle the sensitivities with race and culture.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. That's really good because sometimes people they don't pigeonhole themselves, but they wonder if their work of art will actually be enjoyed by other cultures. And so it's not always important because you write for who you write for. You write for your own audience. But it's always nice to know when other cultures can enjoy your book just as much as somebody within your own culture.
Yeah, and it was surprising to me because some of my beta readers, and I was specific about my beta readers with One Love Ones and this one, that
Mhm,
they aren't all from my culture or demographic or even my
mhm,
target audience. And yet they still found enjoyment in it because they love
mhm.
storytelling and they could relate to some of the experiences. So
Right.
it's encouraging for me to know that even if this is my target audience, you're still encouraged by it. You still get something out of it and can appreciate it.
Mhm, mhm. So, as someone deeply connected to your community, and also connected to your storytelling, how do you envision the future of literature in terms of like diverse voices and representation?
I genuinely feel that now is our time when everything happened with George Floyd and finally the Black Matters movement was heard because we've been out
Mhm.
here saying it for years, but it was
Right.
finally heard and acknowledged. It was like, wow, these major companies and businesses, regardless of their motives, started giving us space. And
Yeah.
we'll see Black stories, when you look for a movie, now we got a category, now we out here. And so, even one of the motivations for me to publish urban stories was because there was an opportunity for unagented Black authors to have their works submitted. And it kept coming to me. And that was my motivation because I had those stories for a couple of years and I just was sitting on them. But because
Mhm.
the opportunity was there, I'm like, all right, let me try to submit this. And so I could see that there is a window open right now for Black writers because people want to hear our stories. I feel like it is an opportunity for another Black renaissance in media. So I'm capitalizing on that. I'm hoping that we will see more of these stories that simultaneously are filled with faith, hope, and love,
Mm.
and not just our culture, because clearly there's some negative things to our culture too, but I'm hoping that we can be the voice that is Black joy as well as trauma because there's so many movies out there in our culture filled with trauma. So that's one of the goals too, is like, yeah, the messaging in my books and my stories are Black joy. So I think it's happening now. I don't know if it'll suddenly end, but I hope it doesn't. But I
Yeah.
do feel like now is the time to capitalize on that.
Mhm. Now, if somebody wanted to publish with your company, what would you be looking for in an author or in their books, and how would they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so we look for stories that are similarly aligned with our values of hope and triumph and encouragement. It's one thing to go through hard things, but it's another to get on the other side and to encourage someone else that they too can get on the other side. So
Mhm.
if you're interested, we do one-on-one consultations. You can schedule at ndmiller.pub. You can also email me info@ndmillerpublishing.com.
Great, great. Well, it has been lovely talking to you today, Nicole. I just want to give you the opportunity to let people know where they can follow you at. You gave information about your publishing company, but if people want to watch your YouTube or your Instagram videos and buy your books, can you give yourself a shout out?
Yeah, so I'm definitely active on Instagram. You can follow me at HTOHB, which stands for How to Overcome Heartbreak. If you want to follow the publishing company, it's at ND Miller Publishing. I'm also on Facebook, facebook.com/HTOHB. Once in a while, I'm on Twitter at Nicole D. Miller, but don't hold your breath. And I am active on LinkedIn. So,
That's awesome. That's awesome. And your books as well. Can you give a
yeah.
shout out to the titles again?
Right. So, how to overcome heartbreak, stories that heal, stories for the urban soul. You can go to NicoleDMiller.com. And then when love wins, love.
All right. And your third book, I know you kind of mentioned that. Can readers expect that soon? You said it's with the
Yeah.
beta readers right now.
So, this is actually my fifth book.
Oh, your fifth book. I'm so sorry.
All good, girl. So it's my fifth book, and yeah, it's in the hands of my beta readers, but it's a novel loading, is what I'll say, and it is definitely
Okay.
part of the Devon's Cafe series that I'm creating. And just to clarify, my pen name is Nicole D. Miller, so if you just Google Nicole D. Miller, you'll find me.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you all for tuning in to our conversation with Nicole D. Miller. Nicole, we wish you the best of luck with everything. And please let me know when your fifth book is released.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again. It's been a joy. Bye bye now.
Bye.
All right, that is it for this episode. Whether you watched on YouTube, listened on your podcast platform, or saw a snippet on social media, I hope that it was valuable for you and that you will return for another episode of Ink and Inspiration. Have a peaceful, prosperous, and joy filled rest of your day. Catch you later, social fam.